Let me tell you about a first-second combined class rule. So that becomes our point of departure, what real learning looks, some snapshots. Let me tell you about a first-second combined classroom in Massachusetts, where the kids had been studying the Mayflower on an ongoing basis, and one day arrived at school in the morning to find that all their chairs and tables had been pushed to the corners of the room, and on the floor was an enormous ship in masking tape. They were naturally buzzing with curiosity, and once everybody had arrived, the teacher explained that this was, in fact, the Mayflower, the very ship that they had been studying. And on cue, in comes, dressed up, one of the kids from the class named Zeb, who was carrying a scroll. And he read from the scroll, "This is a note from the king." And the king says, "We can't go on the ship until we know how big it is." "Okay," says the teacher to the class, "we have to figure out some way of knowing how large this ship is. Anybody have any ideas?" Long, painful silence. The kind that the teacher later reported was enough to make her reconsider whether this was a wise thing to have done in the first place. Finally, one kid speaks up, a kid named Tom, and he says, "Well, it can't be 3 feet, because the nurse measured me, and I'm 4 feet, and the boat's smaller than me. I mean, bigger than me. The boat's bigger than me." Okay, now this gets kids talking. They start offering ideas, and somebody says, "Why don't we measure how many times Tom can fit in the ship?" Tom is happy to volunteer for this assignment. So they measure it and find that the boat is about 4 Toms long. "Okay, we've done it." "That's great," says the teacher, "except for one problem. The king has never met Tom. How will he know what that means?" She waits for somebody to supply the information that Tom just told us he's 4 feet tall. And nobody says it. Does the teacher supply this information? No. The best teachers have teeth marks on their tongues. They talk about some other possibilities, and finally somebody says, "I heard that you can measure horses with hands. Why don't we measure it with hands?" The kids rush to do this. One kid in particular named Mark, and he does it, and then he does it again and gets 2 different answers. With a lot of advice, he finally gets the idea you really have to start just at one end of the boat and leave no space in between your hands. Does it several times, gets the same answer each time. The boat is about 36 hands long. "We did it," they say. Teacher says, "That's great. But just to be sure, Sue," she's the smallest kid in the class, could you do this too?" And Sue measures it, and now the boat is 42 hands long. Chaos, animated discussion. The kids have realized that all hands on deck are not of equal length. What can we do about this? Well, by now they've taken up quite a bit of time, and they have to move on to music or something like that. So what does the teacher do about the fact that they've run out of time? She says, "We're not done. Real learning takes time. So we'll come back to it tomorrow," whether she had planned that or not. Because learning, not the schedule, real learning, not coverage of a prefabricated curriculum, matters the most in that classroom. It turns out that delaying the rest of this one night was a good idea because a kid came up with a brainstorm overnight. He said, "We could do it with feet." And so they start to measure it with their feet, but find that here too there's a difference between the biggest and the smallest kid, and now another kid has a brainstorm. "Why don't we measure it with Zeb's feet? After all, the king knows Zeb. He gave him the note." So they measure it in units of Zeb's feet. And they reach a satisfying answer, and now the kids want to measure other things in the room in units of Zeb feet, which the teacher is happy to let them do. Only on the 3rd day, returning again to this topic, does the teacher for the first time introduce the concept of standard units of measurement. And only after that does she give them rulers. Pretend you have just been watching this lesson over 3 days. Do me a favor. Turn to somebody sitting near you, preferably somebody you don't know, so that could be somebody sitting in the row behind you or in front of you. Say hi, introduce yourself quickly, and then take a minute and a half, no more than that, to see if the two of you can come up with something that you noticed in this classroom during this lesson that struck you as interesting, as perhaps remarkable, unusual, compared to the way math is taught or other subjects are taught, not only at that grade level, but at any grade level. Say hello.